I'm a community patrol officer for a neighborhood in southern Las Vegas. If you aren't familiar with this occupation, it's nothing like a police officer or anything. I'm just a regular 25-year-old that drives a small patrol vehicle around nice neighborhoods to make the residents feel safer. It's a pretty common thing around here, since there's a lot of rich neighborhoods right next to a violent city. On my patrols, I have to also report specific community violations. For instance, some housing communities require bushes to be trimmed every week, so if I see an overgrown bush, I have to report it and leave a note at the residence. It's petty, and I personally find it weird that people like to live in neighborhoods like that, but it gives me a job, so I can't complain too much. Anyway, I primarily work 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. It's an odd shift, but that's just how they schedule for some reason. I'd never seen anything strange before this incident. The only things I'd ever really see were groups of teenagers doing dumb shit at the parks at 1 a.m. But last week, I had something happen that was beyond disturbing, and I can't stop thinking about it. I was doing my regular patrol, which was a specific route we had to take during the middle, beginning, and end of our shifts. This was my mid-shift patrol, so it was about 10 p.m. and pretty quiet outside. During the drive, I have to check the community pools to make sure they are locked for the night. I pulled into the small parking lot and walked over to the gate. I quickly walked inside and checked the pool area to make sure nobody was still inside, then went back out and locked it. As I made my way over to my car, I noticed a hooded man sitting on one of the park benches not far from where I was. Both of his hands were in his pockets, and he seemed to just be staring at the ground. Honestly, I thought this dude was just waiting for his drug dealer or something, but I didn't know, nor did I really care. I got back in my car and continued on with my route. The community is large, and the routes take probably an hour to complete with no traffic. By the time I finished, it was just about midnight. For the next little bit, all I had to do was drive around the neighborhoods. I mindlessly moved the car through the streets for a while, before finding myself back by the pool, to which I noticed that the man was no longer sitting on the bench. I slowed the car a bit, looking around the sidewalks in the park purely out of curiosity, but I didn't see him anywhere. Not thinking much of it, I kept on. As I drove past the dark, empty park, I couldn't help but get an uneasy sense going through me. I don't know what it was, but something felt off. I continued for a few more minutes before pulling up to a stop sign and noticed a man on the side as if he was going to walk across. After a few seconds, I recognized him as the same hooded man from earlier. He slowly made his way across, but stopped halfway and turned to face me. Being only a few feet away, he quickly walked up to my window, trying to ask me something. I cracked the window slightly, and the man quickly asked me where a specific address was. Of course, I said I didn't know. Sure, I could have looked it up or given him a general direction, but the circumstances of the situation felt very off. Even more oddly, he didn't even have any emotion or response when I said I didn't know. He just stood in silence for a second, then repeated his question, exactly as he said it before. This was when I really started to get nervous and feel unsafe. I told him I needed to leave, quickly rolling up my window and beginning to move forward. The man didn't do anything as I drove off. Looking in my rearview mirror, he was just standing there in the middle of the road watching me drive away. I parked down by a nearby street by one of the houses, then collected my thoughts. It was a really weird encounter, but was it reason enough to call the police? I didn't know. As bad as it sounds, calling the police while at work is a big deal, and I didn't want to unless it was actually necessary. The big question that kept coming up in my mind, though, was why was he looking for that address? I decided to type it into my GPS, and it was just a few minutes away, inside the neighborhood I was patrolling. So, I got back on the road and made my way over to the address. When I arrived, it seemed like every other ordinary house at 1 a.m. All the lights were off and nobody was outside. I parked on the other side of the street and waited for a bit, but not even 30 seconds later, the hooded man came into sight, walking down the sidewalk towards the house. I watched from my car as he walked up their driveway and up to their front door. He knocked a few times, then waited for a while before knocking again. Almost a whole minute went by before someone answered the door. Immediately, the hooded man slammed his body into the homeowner and fought his way inside the home. I was in shock, seeing something like this for the first time happening right in front of me. I controlled myself as soon as I could though and called the police. As I sat waiting in fear, I didn't see any movement for 2 or 3 minutes. I debated with myself whether or not to go in and try and help the homeowner. Honestly though, I was terrified and didn't want to make an already horrible situation even worse, so I stayed in my car. Suddenly, the front door moved a little, then swung open abruptly, followed by the hooded man sprinting out and running off down the street. The police didn't arrive until almost 10 minutes later. I don't know what took so long. I'm sure it wasn't anyone's fault, but part of me was furious. By then, the man was long gone, and the homeowner was laying inside, having been beaten so hard that he was unconscious. Over the next few days, more unfortunate information came in. The homeowner didn't recognize the man from anywhere, and barely even remembered the situation, but the guy also didn't steal anything from his house. This was very unusual, because the man had clearly known of the homeowner's address, and his only known goal was to hurt the homeowner. Thus, it didn't make much sense for the suspect to not be someone he knew. The whole thing was very strange, and it still makes me feel uneasy. It's only been a week since this happened though, so hopefully more information comes up, and the hooded man gets caught.